Hello and welcome to Life as a Scale Model. If you're returning, thank you for returning to our channel. If you're new here, please take a moment and like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us to put up the good fight in the algorithm and allows us to make cool videos in the future. Today we are circling back and going through a time warp because we're doing yet another Constitution refit model. This time we're doing the Enterprise A, as you can see from the decals here. This is from the brand new Enterprise kit that Round 2 just put out last month. As you can see, we got some cool Star Trek decals. They've got some pretty good instructions, and so we're going to use those instructions to build our model today. I will mention on the front end, we still don't have decals for the landing gear covers on the original series Enterprise. I was a little disappointed not to see that, but we got a lot of other fun goodies to keep us busy. So as usual, when removing these parts from the sprue, which I also washed with warm soapy water before I started the process, I'm just using my hobby snippers to snip them off the sprue and leaving just a little bit of extra plastic so I don't accidentally cut into the model itself as I'm removing the pieces from the sprue. And now I'll take my file here and I will just file that down so it's flush with the rest of the model. It's important to be gentle with these things as you're working. I did have a little oopsie later on in the process where I cut a little too far into the model. Took a little chunk that I didn't want to take and ended up having to go back and fill that. And we definitely don't want that. So just take your time, be gentle, be patient, and life will be peachy. Now that I got those filed down, I'm going to dry fit them to see how they fit together. I cannot back it up as fact, but they may have moved the pegs. Oh no. I just had a really hard time getting this bad boy to fit together. You may have noticed, though, if you're an eagle-eyed returning viewer, that there is something that was improved that's a little thing, but it's a huge quality of life thing. And that is that there's no copyright text on the inside of the saucer here. With the previous kit, which came out in 2017, as I was building it up, I made a gripe that all that copyright text was on the inside of the top half of the saucer. And so when you put it together, if you weren't planning to paint it, you could see all of that text through the translucent plastic they used to make those pieces. And so if you just, snapped everything together and threw the decals on it, you'd be able to see all that copyright information through the top half of the saucer, and it would not present itself very well. So I'm glad to see that Round 2 either heard my gripe there or at least caught on that maybe that wasn't the best idea for a kit that they didn't intend you to necessarily paint, and got rid of that. I'm going to give credit where credit's due. That was a good move on Round 2's part. Now, as far as applying glue, I'm just going along the outer edge of the bottom half of the saucer there. That's where I felt the best contact point would be for that. And then I'm just going to work my way around and make sure that those posts slot into those holes really tightly. And now I'm going to grab some clamps, and I'm going to clamp around the outer perimeter here of the model saucer to provide pressure, downward pressure on those two pieces, sandwich them together real hard. And so that way, hopefully, when the glue dries, the pieces will be fitted together really, really well. Now, that's usually not the case. I usually have to go back and do a little filling and fixing, but I think it's still worth the effort. So we're just going to follow along with the instructions here. I'm going to cut off the cut the pieces of the warp nacelles off the sprue. Um, I didn't remember from last time, but I should have because I only built this model 6 weeks ago. But the halves of the nacelles are not next to each other. So you're definitely going to have to just kind of pair them up by your eyeball. It's not hard. You can tell which pieces go together and which pieces wouldn't. Now, once again, we are going to file down the nubs that I left on the model, on the model pieces, I should say. It's going to give us hopefully a pretty good seam, but we'll go back and we'll check those seam lines later just to make sure that we got them all even and sanded well. It's really easy to get your file in there and file that nub down. These nubs on the back side are a little bit harder because the area is a little bit more narrow than the file. So if you have a smaller sized file, that would probably work. I wouldn't recommend doing what I'm doing. I'm very carefully using my hobby knife to cut that nub off. You can, but as I mentioned previously, you do run the risk of cutting into the actual model piece itself, and that's going to add a little extra work down the road if you remove material that is not supposed to be removed. So I would say work at your own discretion. Do what feels good. Do what you feel comfortable doing. After all, it's your model. And the only thing that matters at the end of the day is that you're happy with the results. So I'm trying to be as meticulous with this build as I can be, at least as much as my ADHD will allow me to be. So I feel like I got a little in a rush with the last refit Constitution build. Yeah, we had some weather issues around my neck of the woods and illness, and so I felt like for most of that build I was a little behind the eight ball trying to keep up with my time frames. But weather's been a little bit calmer and I'm feeling much better, and so we're going to try to really take my time with this one and get the best results I can get. And that's why I'm just meticulously going through the warp nacelles here and sanding them. I'm really just trying to make sure that I don't have any excess plastic from the sprue or from injections hanging around that might upset the fitment of the pieces later on down the road. I really want those nacelles to be as straight and as perfectly aligned as I can get them. I've been struggling with that since the NX refit build, so I'm trying to mend the error of my ways. But here we're just gluing those two pieces together, and I really do like the hobby glue that I use because it sets up real quick, so I don't have to sit there for a really long period of time and wait for it to set. And for those of you who are curious, I get the Mr. Cement plastic model glue from Hobby Lobby, and it's real thin, so it can get into little spaces really easily, and for the most part with the brush, it tends to go just exactly where I want it to go. So those are kind of my two big qualifiers for good glue, and then it's just kind of a bonus that it sets up real quick. I don't have to fiddle with what piece is glued together for too long. So again, I'm just trying to make sure that I've got everything really well sanded and really well prepped for later steps in the build process. If you take your time early on in the build while you're putting individual pieces together for sub-assemblies or whatever the case may be, you're going to save yourself a lot of headache and a lot of time later on. So I would definitely recommend being conscientious of your pieces and whether or not they've got, extra stray injection mold plastic or whatever the case may be. And pay particular attention to areas of the pieces that are going to be used to join two pieces together. Because as I've learned in previous builds, I believe with the NX refit, if you miss a little bit of extra plastic that's not supposed to be there, it can throw off your whole build. And that is definitely no bueno. So yeah, I may look like I'm obsessive here, but I'm just trying to save future me a little bit of a headache. And I've been relying so far on my flat file here. It's definitely my preferred file of choice. But I'm sure you may be aware that files come in all different shapes and sizes, so use whatever works for you. Now, here's a great demonstration of why you maybe don't use your hobby knife to remove excess plastic from your model. I definitely cut into the plastic of the actual model itself. Fortunately, it was just a little piece, and when we get further along down the build process, we will go ahead and fill that with some filler and try to blend it so it doesn't look like I goofed there, but I definitely goofed there. Shame on me, because I actually have a square file that is narrower and would have fit just fine in that space. I just didn't feel like digging it out of my file jar. But knowing I was going to have to go back and fix it, I'm just going to lay down some more glue on my joint surfaces here and keep on going. That's definitely a good piece of advice, I think. Don't sit there and dwell on mistakes or little oopsies or goofs you might have made. That's just gonna frustrate you, and it's gonna put a damper on your experience. And hobbies are supposed to be fun and relaxing, so acknowledge that it happened. Start moving on, and make a plan to correct things if you feel like you can. If you feel like you can do that, and don't sweat the small stuff. It's real hard to destroy a model to the point that can't be fixed. So I'm really terrible as a YouTuber about prepping my area for the projects I'm doing, which is why there's sometimes a little downtime where you just see me sit there doing nothing. But in this case, I'm pretty sure I was looking at my resources in my Haynes USS Enterprise Owner's Manual. I periodically look at that just to get an idea of what my subject is supposed to be looking like, and to ensure that I stay on the right track when it comes to the build, because even with the instructions, they can sometimes be a little vague, and so I like to double check things. I'm just a little paranoid like that sometimes. But we've got the two halves of the engineering hull here that we've pulled off the sprue, and in this case, I don't feel too bad about using my hobby knife because this is an area of the model that no one's actually ever going to see. That's one of the beauties of the way that they engineered this new Enterprise refit kit, or I guess Constitution refit kit, is a lot of the joining areas where subassemblies go together are placed in such a way that you don't actually see them. And I couldn't be happier with that development personally, because it just makes your job that much easier during the build process, because you don't have to worry about going back and filling seams in areas where people might actually be able to see things. But remembering the problems that I had last time with this part of the build, I did try really hard to prep the pieces in such a way that I would be able to finagle things a bit and hopefully get the warp nacelle pylons sitting a little bit more flush. As you remember, I may or may not have mentioned in the previous Constitution refit build that the portion of the warp nacelle pylon piece that sandwiches between the engineering hull has a tendency to sit a little high. And I did try to correct that when I built the previous model, but I don't feel like my results were that good. So I thought, well, if it's riding a little high, then why don't I just sand a little of the excess plastic off of that area where it actually sits. Maybe that'll give me the ability to get it to sit a bit more flush. So we will see how that turns out. I'm not going to spoil anything just yet. But I'm just obsessively sanding things. The bottom of the engineering hull is another area where I noticed you can get some pretty ridiculous seam lines. So I'm trying to preemptively take care of that so I don't have to worry about it later on. But as you'll see, we are going to go back, and once we get the pieces joined together, I'm going to go back and sand that and make sure that that seam goes away as best I can. Now I'm just sanding those warp nacelle pylon pieces just a little bit. Mostly just to make sure that the nubs at the ends of the pylons are not too big. I can understand why Round 2 would want to engineer things so that they fit within very rigid tolerances. But my reasoning was, if I don't have the flaps too large, that'll give me a little bit of wiggle room to move those the warp nacelles themselves around, and that'll help me in aligning the warp nacelles. Now, it's kind of hard to see, but I think I got some pretty good results when it came to sanding down that little area where the nacelle pylon base sits. You definitely can't tell as much that there's a seam there. Not that it matters, because we're going to fill it. But I would call that good progress. So now we're just going to peel the thing apart. I recently cut my fingernails before I did this and realized, oh man, that was a mistake. They weren't that long, and now I can't get the thing peeled apart. But there we go. Another solution to that would be maybe to get like your putty knife and wedge it in there and wiggle it about until you can get them to peel apart a bit more. But I didn't think about that at the time. But having dry fit everything, I felt pretty confident about going ahead and gluing that whole subassembly together. And so that's exactly what we're going to do here. I did at first try to avoid getting glue like on the nacelle pylon base in the hopes that if I had to wiggle it around after I got the two halves of the engineering section together, that I'd be able to do that. But then I realized that those two pieces fit together so snug that it was really not going to be possible for me um, to avoid just sandwiching that thing in super tight. So that's when I gave that up and said, well, better to have more glue to join things together than to chase a pipe dream that probably won't work out. Now you can see here, I missed the mark the first time around getting that thing put together. I don't know what happened there. I think maybe one of the nubs wasn't quite lined up and it just slipped, but little finagling, and you can see I got everything back on track. Sometimes your pieces are going to want to do that. They're just going to be like, nope. We'll set that to the side. And through the magic of editing, it is now good to go. And so the last piece for this subassembly is the deflector area. One thing I appreciated about this model and the way it's engineered, and I sang its praises the last time I built it too, because in terms of building, it's a really good build. But one thing I appreciate about this model in particular, with the way they engineered the deflector, is there's actually a little key slot that is engineered into the pieces between the engineering section and the deflector, so that it's pretty much impossible for you to put that deflector on the wrong way, or any wrong way, I guess I should say. You can see it there near my right pointer finger. And, you know, that's something that if I weren't already disgruntled for other reasons, I would probably be disgruntled about when it comes to the original series Enterprise. They don't have that same feature, and so you can twist that thing 360 degrees if you want, and it's just going to turn with you. But here you got something to help you feel a little bit more confident about what you're doing, because it's been made to just work. And just like that, our engineering section is built. So here we are back. We've got all of our sub-assemblies for the most part built. Or I should say for the most part finished. But nothing's ever truly finished until the fat lady sings. I don't know. That I'll work on that. We definitely need to fill though, and I felt like I should have done the filling and whatnot with the previous iteration of building this kit before I actually put all the sub-assemblies together, specifically so that I would have the ability to then sand at various different angles without worrying about the saucer section being in the way, or, you know, catching something on a warp nacelle and breaking the entire pylon off, whatever the case may be. I got my finger dirty, that's a regular occurrence here at Life as a Scale Model, getting things on my fingers. I don't know why I felt the need to do this right at this very minute, but it dawned on me, hey, I should definitely get these nacelles prepped and do a dry fit on one of the nacelles to see how it's going to fit on the engineering hull, and maybe see too if there's not going to be alignment issues I have to worry about correcting somehow. And these are a little bit difficult to sand simply because they've got a lot of curvy textures to them. My biggest issue wasn't really any seam lines, although I'm just out of habit doing a little bit of sanding to get those taken care of. My biggest issue was those things are so small that when I put the glue on, it pretty much invariably it always gets a little glue where I don't want it to go. And so you get little thumbprints made out of glue on your nacelles, and you just got to sand them off. So now with that done, and my putty, my filler is still quite wet, I am going to dry fit a nacelle. And yeah, they're a little fiddly to put on. You definitely could have problems, especially if you've got wet filler on your engineering section. But as you can see, a little patience, a little ingenuity, and we made things work. Kind of. We eventually got there. And now my bombastically awesome hair is going to get in the way in just a moment, as I do what I consider to be a fairly critical part, which is use the grid lines on my mat there to see how straight the nacelle sits compared to the engineering hull. And yeah, I was real thorough about this because honestly, despite how some of these builds have turned out, it's something I'm pretty obsessive about. And I was quite pleased that that nacelle was pretty well aligned. So I believe it's now the next day, and I have let that filler dry for 24 hours-ish. And now we're going to just start sanding. This is one of them builds where you just kind of have to do the filling and the sanding as you go. And not just because, there's not a lot of it to do. I do have to admit, I am using the Vallejo filler a little bit differently than I have in the past. Normally I would just put it in my seam and then I'd wipe the excess off with a Q-tip. And I've gotten decent results doing that. This time I decided to let it dry just to see if there were any other kinds of ways I could use it. And it's kind of a weird consistency once it sets up. It's more like a sponge. I didn't realize it at the time that I was working, but if you got a steady hand and you don't get too uppity with it, that does mean perhaps that you could just use your hobby knife to cut all the excess off the surface of the model, just following the contours with your hobby knife or whatever. I do a little bit of that. As you'll see, I use a lot of different tools to get this stuff off, but it didn't sand the way that I expected it would sand based on previous experiences with other fillers. It definitely speaks to opinions I've shared in the past where I've said, yeah, this definitely has its use cases. And it certainly does. And I'm just trying to figure out how many different use cases it's good for. Sanding after the fact is a little bit troublesome, but not impossible, as you can tell. So I'm just working my way around with my 60 grit sandpaper That's my happy medium. Gritty enough to do things relatively quickly, not so gritty to make such deep gashes that they show after I've primed and painted the base coat. You're witnessing firsthand the old rusty gears in the brain turning as I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I approach this? I definitely felt like a deer in the headlights uh, doing this particular part of the process, simply because, again, it wasn't the consistency I was expecting, and as a result, it definitely threw me for a loop. Thinking to myself, okay, how do I do this? The other thing is, I definitely, despite the fact that most people aren't even going to see the underside of the warp nacelle pylons, I definitely wanted to make things look as lovely and pristine as I possibly could. So I've got my square file now, which probably should have been on the scene far earlier than I brought it in, but as they say on my world, c'est la vie. But I like the square file because with the point at the end, I can really get in there and if I need to get a bit more aggressive with it, I can do that just by adjusting the angle and the amount of pressure that I'm putting on the file as I use it. And now I'm obsessing over making sure that there isn't any extra filler material between where the pylon meets the engineering hull, because the Constitution refit definitely has some really beautiful, graceful lines, and I didn't want to detract from that if I could help it. And yeah, my hand was just instinctively moving from tool to tool, thinking, okay, what's the best way that I can get in here and get this done? I haven't had a light bulb moment yet. I'm just doing this the way that I'm used to doing things with my other filler. And as you can see from the growing pile of dust on my mat there, I had a reason to believe that my regular methods were working out okay. They just weren't working as quickly as I would prefer. But I was pretty happy with what I'd done on the port side. I figured it was time to get started on the starboard side as well. Again, trying to figure out how I can work with this filler. I thought, well, what if I got a Q-tip wet and started scrubbing at it with wet Q-tip? That did nothing. Once it's set up, it won't apparently dissolve quite so easily or wipe quite so easily. So we're back to sandpaper. Feel free to make fun of me in the comments here if you feel so inclined. But this is kind of how we learn. We pick up new products and we just kind of experiment with them and see what they do, see what they can do, and see what we can do with them. See how we like them. And that's how we build our skills. So yeah, I'm just going at it with every sanding tool I can think of, trying to get this thing finished. And ironically, I'm scraping things off the surface with my thumbnail, and I still haven't made this connection yet. And once we get there, I'll point it out. You'll be like, ah. But I've already pointed it out. I could have just probably, like I said, used my hobby knife and real gently just cut off that spongy material following the surface contours of the model itself. And this probably would have taken me like 45 seconds to a minute. But you live, you learn. I was a little hesitant because I'd already taken a bit too much material off of a model, off of this model, and I did not want to. I did not want to make a big goof after I'd gotten so far along in the process. But here it is. I'm like, well, maybe I can get that little bit out of that crook between the pylon and the engineering hole with my hobby knife. And that worked out pretty good. I was like, well, why am I not just using the hobby knife? Here we go. Now we're using the hobby knife. Now we're cooking with fire. So, having made that discovery, I'm like, well, I can do that all over this thing. And that's just exactly what I did. I mean, the process was already pretty well done at this point, but I figured, why not use my hobby knife to make sure things are extra clean? It's like old Scotty says, the right tool for the right job. And so yeah, I'm just carefully and methodically working my way around and trying to get all that excess filler off as best I can. I meant to pull out one of my other Constitution refit kits. I felt like this kit was not molded in plastic that was as translucent as some of the previous kits I've seen for the refit Constitution class. And my theory is because with this particular set, it's actually meant to be built as the Enterprise A. I don't know. But it definitely seemed a little bit more dull. So maybe next video I will dig out one of my older versions of this kit, and we'll do a comparison to see. So now I'm pretty happy with the way the warp nacelle pylons look and the way that back section of the engineering hull looks. And so now I'm really just trying to make sure that those seam lines there at the bottom of the engineering hull disappear. And I did get pretty aggressive here because I was less so with the previous refit Constitution that I did. And the results were fine, but I knew I could do better. So I thought, well, there's plenty of plastic there. I don't have to get that much off in order to get these seam lines to disappear, but they do need to be disappeared. So if I have to get a little bit more aggressive than I usually do, so be it. And I did. And I think it worked out okay. We'll see what the results look like when I put down that first coat of primer in the next video. So I'm digging through to get my round file. Just trying to make sure that all the excess debris in that hole is filed out. And I'm making sure that the seam line on the front of the neck is all smoothed out, because I know from previous experience that that area tends to be a little bit of a problem area. And of course, I have to dig around my workbench here to get whatever it is I'm working on next and get all the tools for it. But I left this intentionally because I don't know what y'all are doing, but I find that I tend to be a little more chaotically organized in my workspaces. And I just think it needs to be said that while that's fine, just be aware that that is going to add time to your build process. I always come up with these estimates in my head like, oh, it's only going to take me so many minutes or so many hours. And I forget about all of that extra time that I use, looking for tools or looking for whatever it is that I need in order to continue the model building process. So if you are also chaotically organized, just bear that in mind as you're making estimates. We're back to working on seam lines here on the bottom of the model. I feel like with the original series Enterprise and the refit, there were some things that were just avoidable, but ended up being really disappointing in the end for me. And so I'm trying really hard to get myself a win here by being very, very meticulous about everything and trying to work methodically and slowly so that I'm not missing any any steps or any details. But yeah, I'm starting to feel pretty happy about how that engineering hull's looking. And now I'm going to go back and I'm just going to visually inspect those warp nacelles as well. So I know there's still remnants of thumbprint on them. And I also know there's not a whole lot I can do about that, but I'm going to do what I can about the things that I can do, if that makes sense. And now we're going to take a look at the saucer. I cut the footage for the sake of time, but this is not the first time we've looked at the saucer during this build, believe it or not. I've just kind of in the background, as I've had some downtime between build steps, been checking to see how the fitment looks and putting more glue into seams and cracks and reapplying clamps as necessary. And so I've got everything looking relatively good at this point. But there are just some things that no matter how much you try to glue and clamp and glue and clamp, maybe they're not going to quite fit together all that well. And the backside of this model in particular tends to be a little bit, let's just say stubborn. And so I'm doing some sanding, just some preliminary sanding to try to get the seam lines to blend between the two pieces. And I'm also carefully examining the gaps between the pieces themselves. And they're barely perceptible. And probably a lot of my friends who aren't big into modeling would look at it and be like, yeah, that looks great. But it needs to pass muster with the biggest critic, and that would be me. And if I know it's there and I also know that I didn't try to do anything about it, it's just going to kind of irk me. So got my putty knife here and my Tamiya putty, and we're just going to use the Tamiya putty to fill some gaps. Now, I've been using Tamiya putty for well on a decade now, and I love Tamiya putty. It's I don't know what it's even made out of, but it's to me it's great. It spreads very very smoothly for the most part. Um, it's great for this particular use of filling gaps and whatnot, but also if you don't glop it on real thick and heavy, it sets up real fast. So you can apply it and it'll be ready to sand within an hour if you use thin enough coats of it. I really appreciate that because again, with my ADHD being what it is, I don't want to have to wait that long to be doing this kind of stuff. I just want it to be done. Something that I've not done before, but that I've recently picked up and started doing to try to build good habits is I'm going back with my knife here and I'm scraping some of the excess away. That's just going to save me some sanding down the road. And I found that anything I can do to save myself some time on the process is always going to be a good thing. Now here I go starting to put that filler away when I realize, oh wait, I still need to fill the gash that I made on that warp nacelle. So we're going to do that too. Since we already got all the stuff out, I'm just going to take my knife and get myself a little dollop of that putty and use it to fill that part of the nacelle. Just putting some material back where we took material off. It's not ideal, but hopefully when we get done you won't be able to tell that I goofed. That's the most important part. If you don't want to have to suffer the way that I suffer, be more careful with your hobby knife than I tend to be. Now I'm checking what I've done on the saucer, very lightly touching with my finger. And in the few minutes that it took to do the filling on that, this Tamiya putty has already dried and set up. And that's what I'm talking about, folks. It's just super fast. I don't know what Tamiya did to do that, but I do appreciate it. Because when I work, I want things to go as quickly as possible. So now I'm just sanding off glops that I put that were not supposed to be where they are. No matter how careful I try to be, that generally just happens always. It's fine. And yeah, now we're just sanding off the extra stuff that we don't need. And hopefully when we get it all sanded down, what we'll be left with is a nice smooth seamless portion of our model. And yeah, having finished the one side, now I'm going to move to this side. We're going to do this side, which is a lot easier because I did a much better job scraping excess filler off of it. But I found over the course of making these videos, my workflow tends to trend towards, let me do the easiest stuff first. And I save the hard stuff for later. I don't know if you also do that. Get in the comments, let me know, because I don't think I'm necessarily weird that way, but it's just generally how I like to work. And so yeah, I've still got the impulse drive portion of the saucer to sand there. I know I do these videos, you don't hear any sound from me actually working, but more than likely what's going on here is I've got music playing when I work, and it's come to a song I don't want to listen to at the time, so I'm skipping to the song that I do want to listen to at the time. That could be a video / discussion point in and of itself. What do you guys do to, have something in the background while you're working? Do you want something in the background while you're working, or do you prefer to work with it quiet? So I've heard some people, they like to put something on the TV while they work. I personally can't do that because I find it far too distracting. So kudos to you if you've got the mental fortitude and the focus to do that yourselves, but it just does not quite work for me. Yeah, just if you feel so inclined, jump in the comments and let us know if you have things to divert you while you're diverting and doing model stuff. So I'm checking my seam line real close to make sure that everything got filled real good. I'm trying to make sure that any stray things hanging off the edges of those pieces get sanded off real good. Like I said, we're gonna try to get a huge win out of this one and build it as close to my exacting and impossible standards as we can possibly get. That's where we're at. And as you can probably tell, I'm thinking I'm at a point where I'm pretty happy with what I got. So, what am I doing off camera? Probably more shuffling through music. I really thrive on having music in the background to occasionally take my brain off of what I'm doing, because if I get too obsessed, then I start going down rabbit holes that tend to be more destructive than constructive. Or I get sidetracked and doing other things that don't pertain to the current project. I also find, though, that it's sometimes helpful to step away momentarily from what you're doing. It's kind of like when you're trying to do really hard math homework and you get stuck on that one problem, and your inclination is, well, I need to get it done. I need to do it. But sometimes the best course of action is to step away from it for a minute and clear your mind. And I sometimes need to do that. I just need to clear my mind and not think about what I'm doing for a second, so that when I start thinking about it again, I can maybe think about it in a way that I hadn't considered previously. It may not be the most efficient process, but I do think that it helps me to get better results overall. And so now I'm going to assume that my filler putty has dried on my nacelle, and I'm going to sand that down real quick. Luckily, my filler putty had actually set up on the nacelle, because if it hadn't, I know from previous experiences that I would have made a terrible mess for myself. And it most likely would have resulted in me having to sand off putty that I accidentally smushed to areas it wasn't supposed to be at, and do the filling process again. So I'm glad that the putty was ready to be sanded when I decided I was going to sand it, because as you could see, I didn't actually check before I just decided to take the sandpaper to it. I was reasonably certain, but I don't recommend being quite that cocky. I'm just trying to get into the little nooks and crannies of the curves on that piece to make sure I get as much of that material off of there as I possibly can. And once again, you see me distracted with who knows what. I am just all over the place. But it was a great awkward segue into, okay, so now we're ready to do our final assembly of the model. And as I recommend in my Scale Modeling 101 video, which is awesome if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend going back and revisiting that. I'm dry fitting these pieces to see, how they line up and how well they fit, and can I get the alignment to be super duper straight so that it meets with my particular standards of quality. And I was pretty happy with the results that I got there. So I'm taking the plunge at this point. I've decided, okay, I think this is going to work out. I'm also checking the fitment as I glue, just to ensure that everything is good and straight. We're going to throw that last nacelle on there. Now we're starting to look a bit more like a starship. If you're building a Star Trek 3 diorama of the destruction of the Enterprise, this is more than likely be where you actually stop a lot of your construction process, because you'd want to, bully up the ship, make it look like it's on fire and exploded, stuff like that. It does appear that I got a little glue on the warp nacelle pylon where it's not supposed to go. And I saw some more thumbprint. So we're gonna, since we're there and we've noticed it, we might as well try to get it all worked out. Like I said, the more of this we do along the way, the less work we have down the road. We don't want to kick the can down the road. And once again, I'm just checking the alignment of these nacelles. I have to admit, from what I saw, they looked really good this time around. checking them from the side. And now I'm going to dry fit the saucer. If you were not gluing this kit together, I will say the fitment on these pieces is so good. This model would absolutely hold together, just from being snapped together. I mean, it would just go together fine, no problems. But I like everything glued. It's just an extra measure of permanence and security that I appreciate. So here I am putting my plastic glue on there. We're going to snap that saucer section down onto the engineering hull, and then we're going to tweak it because it wasn't sitting quite flat. And that's the moment, folks, where I kind of figured, okay, I think we've got this. I think we're good. I give it my thumbs up of approval. Again, I appreciate you guys popping in to watch the video today. If you haven't already, please like the video and subscribe. Another brief announcement, I'm going to be doing a Q&A for our 6-month anniversary, so put your questions down in the comments, and we'll be doing that video in September, so stick around. And until next time, happy modeling.